Summerlin from Chicago, Illinois. Just wanted to give a huge shout out to the Relay for all the love and support they've given my team and I. And make sure you stay tuned for all the latest boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
And now for a continuation on a story that we discussed in a previous video. Pacquiao versus Garcia. Golden Boy's Eric Gomez says the fight won't happen. He was quoted as saying, "There's nothing to talk about there. They contacted us, but it turns out there's nothing to talk about. The fight isn't going to happen." Some of Garcia's representatives say they're still exploring the idea of putting that fight together, but Golden Boy doesn't see that as a realistic possibility, and instead say that it's much more possible that Garcia takes on Teofimo Lopez after a recent meeting with Top Rank's Bob Arum. Teofimo is more feasible. It's one of the fights that's obviously of interest to Ryan Garcia. It could be a great fight. With these statements from Eric Gomez, this normally would be a open and shut case. This would be a finite and conclusive matter. The conflicting part of it is, later on today,
Sean Gibbons,
after this article was published, Sean Gibbons posted this image via his Instagram account, which reads, "Still working on it." The image you can clearly see Manny Pacquiao and Ryan Garcia, and this is conflicting for more reasons than one. This doesn't line up with what Eric Gomez is saying, and in some ways it doesn't line up with what Audi Attar of Paradigm Management was saying in reference to the career of Manny Pacquiao, that Paradigm Management,
they've taken over managing Manny Pacquiao's career,
and that legal repercussions could ensue for anyone assuming the role of Manny Pacquiao's manager, as they are solely responsible for managing what is left of Manny Pacquiao's career. And, you know, I couldn't make sense of it. All these conflicting reports as far as what's Manny Pacquiao's next move. The most sense that I could try to make of it is that maybe Sean Gibbons is in charge of managing Pacquiao's fighters, not Pacquiao himself. But based on what this image implies and what it indicates, it seems to indicate that Sean Gibbons is helping to manage and negotiate that proposed Ryan Garcia fight, that proposed Ryan Garcia engagement. And that's not the only conflicting image posted to Sean Gibbons' page. There's another image there that seems to indicate that Manny Pacquiao is crossing back over to the PBC side of things. It's a screenshot of an article by way of the Phil Star. What it indicates is that Manny Pacquiao is reigniting his relationship with Al Haymon, a relationship that many people weren't sure was still on, or was it off? Was it over? Had their agreement...
did it come to an end?
Just this proliferation of images by way of Sean Gibbons' Instagram page leaves me with the impression that maybe who Audi Attar was talking about in that article was Sean Gibbons? I mean, you reconcile it. You explain it. Why else would Audi Attar feel so inclined to highlight sketchy characters and sketchy dealings that come from people in the world of boxing from it? Why else would Audi Attar and the people over there at Paradigm Management feel so inclined to assert themselves as Manny Pacquiao's sole managerial team, who will be managing whatever remains of his career from here on out? You know, why else would he feel so inclined to make those kinds of statements?
Somebody else running around saying they're Manny's manager?
And these legal repercussions that Audi Attar mentioned for anyone who assumes the role of Manny Pacquiao's manager.
Who'd do that?
Was he saying these things with Sean Gibbons in mind?
Gotta be a reason he said that stuff.
With all these rumors swirling of a Ryan Garcia fight that may or may not be being worked on as we speak, rumors that an offer was actually made to Floyd Mayweather Jr. to engage in a rematch situation with Manny. Where are all these rumors coming from?
And this Paradigm Management out of the loop.
I mean, I don't know. Did Manny Pacquiao unwittingly double book himself with two separate managerial teams? Sean Gibbons on one side and Paradigm Management on the other. Is Sean Gibbons backdooring the people over there at Paradigm, negotiating deals on Manny Pacquiao's behalf without their knowledge?
How the fuck is everything so immaterial with Manny nowadays?
Is it possible that the fighting senator unwittingly double booked himself with two separate managerial teams, two separate managers? Three if you count Al Haymon, three if that story checks out.
He goes back to the PBC side of things.
Tell you the truth that I don't know what the hell's going on in the land of Pacquiao. But if this does herald the end of all these Ryan Garcia versus Manny Pacquiao talks, I'll tell you the truth, I'm not going to lose a wink of sleep over it, because
It was a dumb fight.
Yeah, I don't think Ryan Garcia belongs anywhere in the same stratosphere as Manny Pacquiao here and now. I think that there are more dignified ways for Manny to spend the twilight years of his career than locking horns with a kid who's wet behind the ears like Ryan Garcia.
The story is that Manny's people reached out to Ryan's.
So when so much of the story has become immaterial due to conflicting reports, it's a situation where you have to quote the old adage, don't believe everything you read.
I mean, at least in the case of Manny Pacquiao.
I stand by my original assertion that Manny really ought to just pack it up. He ought to call it a career. That the WBA, having labeled him a champion in recess, should herald the end of Manny Pacquiao's days in the squared circle. At this point, there's nothing left to accomplish.
Not really.
Not much else. Everything at this point in Manny's career is just extra credit. But when you're reduced to reaching out to a Ryan Garcia for some kind of an engagement,
Because Conroy got his ass knocked out.
you're reduced to reaching out to a Ryan Garcia because your crossover fight with Conroy McGregor has gone swirling down the toilet. Maybe it's time to call it a career. Maybe it's time to hang them up. Maybe it's time to focus on being a politician, as that is what the immediate future holds for Manny Pacquiao, beyond the sport of boxing. Moving on. WBN no longer recognize World Boxing Association as a sanctioning body. That's right. WBN is no longer recognizing the WBA title. The article reads, World Boxing News has made the decision, which turned out not to be a tough one, to remove the World Boxing Association's recognition as a sanctioning body. Due to the circumstances dating back to 2013, Vice President and soon-to-be President Gilberto Mendoza promised WBN he would eradicate the unpopular regular belts. Mendoza was adamant he would move to crown one sole champion per division. It didn't happen. Things became a lot more cloudy when the addition of the WBA Gold Championship a few years later. Add to the situation regarding the heavyweight division, plus the inconsistency in its rankings and titles, WBN has moved to act, stripping Manny Pacquiao of his belt, calling him a champion in recess, at the same time adding Bermain Stiverne to their top 15 ratings, was the last straw. Pacquiao was helping his country fight the pandemic as a senator and was due to fight in 2021. The WBA should have understood this matter. As for Stiverne, ranking a heavyweight without a win for 5 years as the 11th best in the world is an unforgivable and wrong decision. All WBA belts will now be removed from the WBN champions list, and unifications will not be recognized if it involves a WBA belt, and only one of the 3 other major bodies. Undisputed will only be acknowledged if it's between the WBC, the IBF, and the WBO. I understand World Boxing News' decision, and I'll go as far as saying that I sympathize with it, though ultimately it doesn't strike at the heart of the matter. Do you really think that Gilberto Mendoza is losing any sleep that a periodical in the sport of boxing, periodical among many periodicals, many popular mediums for media, do you think Gilberto Mendoza's losing sleep over this? Do you actually think this is making a dent? Well, I'm here to tell you that it's not, because even if other popular periodicals in the sport of boxing, like Boxing Scene and Bad Left Hook,
Yahoo Sports,
the YouTubers, the YouTube channels, the vloggers, even if every single one of them followed suit,
if every single one of them shunned the WBA,
and the fans did too, even if every single one of these popular periodicals and all of their pundits and all of the fight fans so decided to effectively disavow the WBA, that wouldn't solve the problem.
that doesn't get to the heart of the matter.
Maybe it's enough for an individual at the individual level to say that they are no longer going to recognize this sanctioning body as a sanctioning body because it's a sanctioning body that is not doing its job. It is not performing the essential function it's supposed to perform. All we've seen from this sanctioning body is a constant string and assembly line of trinket titles and constant chicanery within their rank standings.
You can disavow them.
I can too. We have our reasons, most of which are justified. I completely understand where the people at World Boxing News
I get it.
are coming from. I share in their gripes with the WBA, but I know that that's not going to solve the problem.
Gilberto Mendoza isn't losing any sleep over what we think.
Gilberto Mendoza doesn't care if either I or you recognize his version of a world title in the sport of boxing.
He only really cares if the fighters recognize it.
He only cares if the fighters, their managers, and their promoters recognize his version of a world title, as they are the ones that are paying him sanctioning fees for those world titles. And so long as they are, this problem isn't going to go away.
Gilberto Mendoza doesn't give a fuck about me or you.
Because he's not collecting sanctioning fees from me or you. But he does care what the fighters, their promoters, their managers, he does care what they think, as he is collecting sanctioning fees from their events, from their fights involving their fighters. Thus, the real solution to this problem lies not with the pundits, not with the fight fans, but with the fighters themselves.
You gotta stop paying these guys to jerk you around.
Because so long as the fighters, the managers, and the promoters are paying sanctioning fees, these sanctioning bodies aren't going anywhere. I think what people aren't really realizing here is that in many ways, the sanctioning bodies and those they collect sanctioning fees from have a business relationship. A relationship that allows a promotional outfit to call one of their fighters a quote-unquote champion without that champion having to face
another champion,
someone else's fighter, someone else's champion. Brandon Figueroa gets to run around calling himself a world titleist without actually having to fight the likes of an MJ Akhmadaliev, who holds the full version of the title that Brandon Figueroa possesses. Brandon's got the lesser version of it, but Brandon ain't got to fight MJ to call himself a champion because WBA's got regular belts and gold belts.
You ain't gotta fight MJ Akhmadaliev.
And whether you're aware of it or not, his handlers want it this way.
They don't want him to have that fight.
You can speculate as to why that is. I mean, maybe they don't think he's ready for it, or maybe they just want him to fight someone else, someone under their own promotional banner, keep everything in-house. It could be any number of reasons, but one way or another, his handlers, they want things to be this way. Really, it's up to them. It's up to them to make the decision as to whether or not they want to pay sanctioning fees to a sanctioning body under these circumstances. It's their money, after all.
So it's their decision.
Me and you, we can sit here berating the WBA until the cows come home. But so long as the fighters are paying sanctioning fees to be able to carry these titles, trinket titles or otherwise, so long as they're paying those sanctioning fees, those sanctioning bodies, they ain't going away. They ain't going anywhere.
You can shun them.
Me and you can say what we want. But here's a newsflash. The lifeblood of these sanctioning bodies aren't comments from either me or you. The lifeblood of these sanctioning bodies aren't articles written by World Boxing News, Boxing Scene, CBS Boxing, or Yahoo Sports. The lifeblood of these organizations are the sanctioning fees. Thus, real change won't happen until the fighters take matters into their own hands and stop feeding the beast.
Now here's the plot twist.
Do you think that's what they want to do? You try telling Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito, that he's not a world champion because he's carrying a WBA title that he won from Khalid Yafai. Go ahead. You tell him that he didn't earn that title. You tell him that he's not the real thing. He's not the genuine article. You do that.
Do that and see what he tells you.
Don't stop with him. Tell Josh Taylor the same thing. Tell Canelo Alvarez. Tell Ryota Murata. Tell those guys that they're not champions. Tell those guys they shouldn't be paying sanctioning fees to this sanctioning body.
And see if that works.
Ultimately, I can disavow the WBA as a sanctioning body just as easily as World Boxing News did. But even if I did that, it's not going to solve the problem. They're not going anywhere. And they're not going anywhere because the promoters, the managers, and the fighters, they don't really want them to.
Did you just now realize that?
And finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, Sean Porter asked what fight has to happen for him to be satisfied with his legacy. And he said, it's Terrence Crawford. I've not given up on that fight. I've had conversations with my dad. Go get that fight. That's the fight for me. So my dad's working. That being said, the Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter fight is once again a conversation since it's crystal clear who Errol Spence Jr. has set his sights on. He's more interested in unifying with Yordenis Ugas than he is interested in unifying with Terrence Crawford. Make of that what you will. I never thought that fight was going to be next anyway.
Crawford fight.
In the interim, I'm okay with the Sean Porter fight. So long as terms can be agreed to, terms can be reached, and a deal can be ironed out. I'm okay with that.
I don't think it's a requisite.
I don't think that Terrence Crawford needs to prove himself to Errol Spence Jr. by fighting Sean Porter. I don't look at the fight that way.
Because Errol's okay fighting Ugas.
Yordenis Ugas, who lost to Sean Porter. Errol Spence Jr.'s fans, they can't sell me this narrative that in order for Terrence to have earned a Errol Spence Jr. fight, he must go through Sean Porter when Yordenis Ugas didn't go through Sean Porter. Oh, he fought him.
And he lost.
But he didn't beat him. And he has an Errol Spence Jr. fight nonetheless. at least according to Errol Spence Jr., as Ugas has something that he wants. He wants Ugas's WBA title more than he wants Terrence Crawford's WBO title. Make of that what you will. In the interim, if a deal can be reached between Terrence and Sean, I'm okay with it.
I am.
Like I said, I just don't think it's a requisite. I saw a lot of people asking why was it that Bob was willing to put up something to the tune of $2 million for Kell Brook, but with Sean, he's only willing to put up $1 million. I mean, what is that? And I think that these people haven't really thought it through. You put up $2 million for a Kell Brook because the hope is that the people over there at Sky Sports will pick up the fight. Thus, you'll make your money back that way. That's what the hope is.
But Bob didn't know they weren't going to pick it up.
Neither he or Kell Brook thought that that was the way the cookie was going to crumble. They figured that there's another arm of revenue there from Sky Sports that will have the fight in the United States and will get some extra money from Sky when they pick it up, not realizing Sky wasn't going to pick it up.
They thought they were going to.
That's why Bob was willing to pay Kell Brook $2 million, whereas with Sean, he's only willing to put up $1 million.
You got Crawford fighting a UK fighter. You want to sell that fight to a UK audience.
But can you do that with Sean?
Can you?
That's the question.
That's why he's only willing to put up half the scratch.
Would the people over there at Sky Sports be more interested in a Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter fight, a fight that doesn't feature a UK fighter? Would they be more interested in that fight than they were in the Terrence Crawford versus Kell Brook fight?
Would they?
They weren't interested in Lomachenko versus Lopez. They didn't pick that up.
And that's what the problem here is.
I can tell you, as a hardcore boxing fan, that there's never a dull moment in the ring with Sean Porter. There just isn't. His name ain't Sean Showtime fucking Porter for no fucking reason. As a hardcore boxing fan, I can tell you that. But no matter what I tell you as a hardcore boxing fan, Sean Porter's purse demands have to be based on something. They have to be based on reality. They have to be based on what money is available.
Because nobody's in the business of giving away money.
Nobody's in the business of giving away millions upon millions of dollars at their own expense.
So you got to get realistic.
Making this fight, trying to, is going to take serious compromise. Serious compromise from both guys on both sides. Otherwise, it don't happen. Now's not the time to get antsy and start making all kinds of astronomical price demands in the middle of a pandemic when the live audiences aren't even all the way back yet. It's just not a good time. So you either want this fight now or you don't want the fight now. But if you do want the fight now, then you have to be willing to compromise. Don't worry about what Kell Brook got.
You ain't Kell Brook.
They only paid him what they paid him because they thought that Sky Sports was going to flip the bill.
And they were wrong.
Are you bringing some other arm of revenue to this fight? Because we know what you ain't bringing. You ain't bringing a belt, so you need to get realistic.